Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and we are here at Nerdarchy with
Dave.
I'm Ted.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that the idea of when you have a party that's been split. Well, actually, you have this tradition in role-playing games where you don't want to split the party. I have recently come up with an idea that I'm using in my Star Wars role-playing game. Just wanted to encourage you guys to check out the Nerdarchy newsletter. It's really great content in there to make your games better and just bring things together and allow you to move forward with your games.
If it'll work for any RPG.
Totally
this
agree.
is an idea that you spent hours thinking about, right?
It came up on the fly in one of my Star Wars games. It was just an idea I had, and I said, hey, you guys can use this idea, and Ted immediately leveraged it, which was
Absolutely.
great. So here's the idea. So in my Star Wars role, I'll explain how it worked in the Star Wars. Actually, I'm going to explain how I'll explain how we did it in Star Wars, and then I'll explain how I will do it in 5th edition.
Okay.
Star Wars role-playing game. Star Wars role-playing game is different than any Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. There are very legitimate reasons to split the party. It's a tradition in Star Wars movies. Han heads this way, Leia heads this way, Luke heads this way. And so when a player says, my character's going to do this thing and totally split off from the party, that's a completely 100% legitimate reason. I think in Dungeons & Dragons, there's really reasons, like if you're playing your characters, you can say, I'm going to go this way, I'm going to break off. For many times, players have been saying, we're not going to do this. So what I did to fix this in my Star Wars role-playing game is I said, every single Star Wars core rule book, there are NPCs in there for me, the game master. Now, you're going to, Ted, you're going to say, my character is going to Bespin. The rest of the characters are going to Kashyyyk, where the Wookiees live. Ted, you now own every single NPC in every single book. And you're going to go through and you're going to say, I am bringing in this rebellion pilot. He has these stats. He has this equipment. He's on page 86 of this book. His name is Sharnwell, right? And he is coming in with his from this squadron, and these guys don't need to work on their Y-wings, but they don't know how to fix this part. So Sharnwell immediately comes in, and so the people who have broken off, rather than sitting there listening to everybody else play, they get to go through every book, pick an NPC, jump in immediately with that NPC, use their stats, use their equipment, and immediately jump into the game and fill a hole that the current characters don't
In
have.
the narrative, in the
Exactly.
story. Now, let me give you guys a little bit background. So we had in our Star Wars game where basically the bounty hunters, the mercenaries were heading off to do this job with Poe Dameron.
Exactly.
But the Jedi couldn't take part because they had to do something else. And Scott going into the session knew that some of the players would be doing one thing and the other ones would be waiting. And he did a really good job of keeping it concise. But his solution, I found, was phenomenal. And it was, we also had this other group of mercenaries with us. And what Scott said was, hey, you can pull any NPC you want for that mercenary group.
Right.
And it had to make sense within the narrative.
So I gave them some boundaries. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
which is important.
now the interesting thing was, now there's two sides to this coin. Number one, there was a problem that the mercenaries were having, and it's like, oh, well, I can solve this problem by helping out. I'm encouraged to do so because it's going to aid my party. But the other thing that Scott had said that definitely had my ears peaked was that he offered XP as a reward for assisting the party. So exactly. I'm like, well, I see no reason why, Xylik, the, human, pirate, wouldn't do this, because I'm going to help out my party, and then my character gets a benefit, even if it was only like 1 or 2 XP. I got something, and I'm part of the story. So the overall beneficial thing is it actually rewards the table with, here's an incentive, because if you're listening, paying attention, you know what's going on, you're still being part of the story, even if you're not interacting. But wait, here's a way for you to still interact. And that's what we do with this game. It is a role-playing game. You are supposed to role-play. It really is a player agency situation. It's just you're not putting I mean, it's player agency because you're not putting your character there. You're taking control of somebody else, and you're puppet streaming him, even if it's for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But it's the reward to the entire table.
And it's a collaborative storytelling effort. And to further highlight, when Ted did that, the situation was like one of the players, just Bart, asked, "Is there a way to get healed? Right? Is there any way for me to get rid of some of this damage?"
Yeah.
And Scott said, "Absolutely not." And then Ted goes into the NPCs and goes, "No, there is. There's a doctor that's one of the mercenaries, the pirates, and he will absolutely tend to your wounds for 500 credits."
And that
Because
for 500 credits, exactly.
Because he's a mercenary, so like I couldn't justify just saying, "Oh yeah, we're working on this together. I'll do this for you for free." It didn't fit. So like I had to basically say, "Well, it's going to cost you."
And one thing I thought was really wonderful was one. We're running a condensed storyline for these guys over here. Ted is supposed to be sitting at the table in a traditional role-playing game. He'd be doing nothing, right? But instead, he's going through the books, which, to me, that's a great part of this game. Just going through the books and he had the ability to say, all these guys can be mine. I can bring them in if I can just think of a cool idea. And he did that. He was right on it. And one of the things, too, was I wanted to press those players saying, you guys are, in a situation where there's very little resources, and I want you to be frightened, right? And it was great that he was able to push back, but at the same time, he was like, I'm still going to cost you. You have to give me those 500 credits.
Well, because at its core, you have to do proper role playing, and I feel that that the idea of what you were putting out there was a lot of fun, and it definitely encouraged the players at the table to not be disruptive, to pay attention to what's going on, even though their characters are not involved. I mean, the story is important to all of us. I mean, as Dave says, it's a collaborative game. We're all playing together. And any tabletop role-playing game is that. You're all doing this together. The DM, the GM, the storyteller, whatever terminology you want to put on it, he's there to assist and offer up story ideas when the players don't seek it themselves, but it's as much your story as theirs, because all you have to say is, I'm going left when he wants you to go right, and that proves how much you're really in control.
Exactly.
So I was like, all right, here's this. But if I were to have done it free of charge, like I would feel like
you wouldn't have stayed in the spirit of the game,
right?
And I would have felt that there would be ramifications, and Scott would be like, well, I'm getting rid of this then, because you guys are you've got the ability to have more power than I do, and it didn't.
But what was so even better is I put this other team of mercenaries there to help them, and another reason why I put them there was I knew it was a bunch of traps, so I needed people who were going to die in the traps rather than you guys being killed in the traps outright. I was okay if you died in the traps, but I wanted you to have some chance to not die in the traps. And those
traps were horrific. I walked away with a scratch or something. I was terrified.
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting was your money grubbing a hired gun who's also a medic really kind of made my world better. Like you were writing in content and supplying a more lustrous, illustrative example of that without me doing the writing. Right. And so that was really
now. Let me
exciting.
expand upon that. Here's the key thing: that scene made your world better because Ted stayed within the narrative and the themes that was presented by the game master.
Exactly.
This is a privilege that can and should be revoked if players are dicks. Like when they start trampling on it and just using it for selfish reasons, and they're not really building on the story, and they're just trying to further the aims of the players, then they've totally stepped out of the spirit of what that player agency is and what you're giving.
Well, and
it needs to be respected.
I've been watching what you guys are saying about player agency and having a better understanding of player agency. And you said something I thought was really worth repeating, and I'm going to say it now because I learned from it. You're saying when you have player agency, you have the ability, you have the rights to do something to change the world, to change the narrative. You do not have the right to change the mechanics. And that and that was a really solid, that helped me.
To take it one step further, player agency at its core is the players being able to offer an idea or a thing into it. as the GM, you are in charge. If somebody says something, does something, and it breaks what you would consider the rules or the spirit or the theme of what's going on at your table, you have the ability to just say no.
Yeah.
Here's a good example, right? Here's a good analogy. We're all toddlers. We're all at Ted's house playing in Ted's sandbox with Ted's sand. What do we have? What can we actually do? We can do anything we want with the sand. We can play in the sandbox, but the rules are you can't leave the box, right?
Right, exactly.
No one wants their sand outside of the sandbox. And because we're playing with sand in a sandbox, we can't build out of clay, we can't build out of rock, we can't build out of Legos because we only have sand.
Yeah.
That sand, that's the narrative and the world concept that your GM has already laid down.
Right.
If you can play with those anyhow, any way you want, but when you start using them in ways that aren't possible, like trying to turn sand into clay, like you could do that if we added some water, but we don't have any water in our sandbox to do it with.
Exactly. So, so I 100% understand where you're going. One thing I wanted to talk about real quick is, so we were using this in Star Wars role-playing game. I am very excited to bring this into the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. And since the Star Wars game, I've been thinking, how can I do this in a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game? And so I'm offering this out to you guys out there. So one, I would really encourage you, I'll give you, so I'm going to tell you the how, and then I would like us to talk about why. So, and I think you should, and here's why. So the first is how, is the first place to start with this is in the monster manual, but not with monsters. So, so the monster manual is incredibly valuable to me as a dungeon master, right? And the reason why is generally not the monsters. I run monsters very little. It is the last 10 or 20 pages where it talks about the non-player characters.
Yep.
So the merchants, the veteran, the noble, exactly.
Gladiator.
Those guys, so you can say, I'm opening these pages to you guys. So if you want your character to go ride to the city of Rylor when everybody else is in Gryffindor, then what you're going to say is, oh, now in the old days, the way we would do it is we'd say, oh, well, your character sits there and does nothing. And so one of two things would happen. The player would actually do nothing, which is terrible. Or what's almost worse is the player would say, well, I'm going to shoehorn some decision for my player to stay, right? Mm-hmm. And or I'm going to bend over backwards to figure out why he doesn't do what he would actually do.
And all of us have had this type of thing.
We've all been
happen. There. And there's myself as a player, and I've caused as the DM this situation of like, well, this is what's going on. You gotta make a decision and do what you want.
But listen to this, okay? If you're a game master out there, this is a new way to play your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. So you can say your character stays with his principles, stays with his alignment, stays with his faith to his God, right? And he rides off to Rylor. Now you as a player, okay, not only do you have nothing to do, but when they stop at the next inn, maybe you're the bartender. When they stop in the forest, maybe there's an elf that comes out of the forest and he talks to them. And you have a player who is now playing another character that nobody at the table, not you as a game master, not you as a dungeon master, not any other player would have expected. And they can jump in and do things that help the party, that just entertain the party. You could have a guy who is playing a barbarian, playing a bard at their camp that night. That is transformative, and I think that could really be interesting.
Now here's the stitch on that. Star Wars has always been a situation where you've got fast travel, lots of very inhabited places, whereas D&D, at its core, it's Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of groups out there, they go into dungeons and they fight dragons. So if you've got a situation where the material that's being presented that night happens to be very explorative or combative, there might not be as many open scenes to be able to insert a mercenary, a role-playing situation. Now, it's definitely useful, and I think there's a different way of actually allowing this type of thing to happen, and it actually very nearly happened in our last session. You were talking to the mayor and the council, and rather than me trying to operate as multiple characters at the same time, I tend to really limit a conversation to the players versus one NPC.
Yeah.
Even when you go back to the session where, you guys were at Dave's house, you were talking initially to Dave's dad, and then it was a conversation with Dave's uncle, and I didn't go back and forth because I don't do a lot of voices,
exactly.
so I tend to limit it to just that. Well, as you remember, the conversation got a little heated. Dave really wanted to step in as one of the council members and just say something, but he didn't seek permission and he didn't want to overstep. So I had told him after the fact, I'm like, you absolutely could have.
Yeah.
Especially because Dave is aware of who the council is, and it wouldn't require me to have to give him information. He knew the character. He knew what that character would say. So that's a really good place to do things. Dave's character was not at that scene, so therefore it was very easy for Dave to have stepped in and say, oh, well, Harak says this.
Yeah. And this is a way to get to the point where your players are saying, I'm not in this scene, but here's a natural, fitting way that helps everybody at the table, the players and the game master, for me to jump in. And of course there's going to be some sharp edges where people learn what's acceptable and what's not, but I think this was really helpful in our Star Wars game. I think this could be equally definitely could be helpful. You're right, it could be a little more challenging in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but even there, this gets back to one of the reasons why I do like high magic. If you want to do this in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, it is going to be easier in a high magic realm. So if he heads off to Rylor and this person's in Griffgaff, if it's a high, or if there are two cities and there are portals where that character can come back in sooner than later, that could be really helpful. So also wizards who have the ability to teleport. So anything that allows you to bring that other player's character back in more quickly is helpful. So that's one thing you want to do. This will be more accessible if it's in a higher magic realm, a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, I would even go as far as to opening up the rest of the monster manual and the other supplements of the game to the players, again, if they stay within the spirit of the story. If they're adding to the story and not the mechanics, it's not a problem.
Yeah, agreed.
And just because something appears a certain way to the players and even to the player that introduced it, as the DM, I have the ultimate narrative to change that as I see fit. Perhaps you did show up as a talking skeleton, and that's what you thought you were, or that's what the part you played, and that's what the party thought you were. But I decided you were actually something else.
Yeah.
And there's enough ways to change that or manipulate
to rein it in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it doesn't even have to be a permanent fixed point in your game, but it might be a jumping off point for new ideas and narrative that you can change later on as a DM and come back to.
Yeah, you've always got the ability to alter what's out there, and they say that perception is based on a point of view, and that's not always accurate. You might think one thing and it's not always a thing. If your DM is going to allow for something like this, please stay within the spirit and do things that's going to enhance everyone's experience there, including the GMs, not just the players, so that you're having fun. And I did it for, like I said, there were multiple reasons, and I was strongly encouraged to do so because I was actually given some kind
rewarded,
of reward. And you don't even have to, if you're playing D&D, where you're not giving out experience, you're just leveling at a certain time and keeping everyone together. There are other things that you can put out there. You can, put out minor boons. You can give out inspiration. You can give out, little tokens that, it's like, oh, well, the next time, a situation comes up where there could be treasure, you can turn this in to increase the amount of loot that's there, and then everybody benefits, or just your character finds this one little thing. There's lots of potential for giving out.
Well, I kind of feel like not sitting on your ass doing nothing all night's a pretty big reward.
Yeah,
and
it's
playing
awesome.
the game
Totally
that I
agree.
showed up to play.
Well, and also I would encourage you guys out there. Some of you guys, you're just like us. If you're a game master, you have 4 to 6 players sitting at the table, maybe even more. And often you have 1 or 2 people who their attention span doesn't fit into one character, or their imagination and their intelligence doesn't fit into one character, where they're constantly having ideas that aren't fitting into the character, that sheet that's in front of them. So if you have a thespian or somebody who is another game master sitting as a player, often those people are fully capable of running multiple characters, and this really unfrees them and unlocks them. You might actually have players who are like, oh, I'm back to playing my character. I can't have anybody from the. I think it's really wild.
You can also do interesting things too. Like say one of your characters in the party has a special familiar, right? An imp or pseudo dragon or something, and like one character that's going to go off on his own. Perhaps you want to go. Well, you know what? I don't want him to go alone. I send my familiar, and you could play as the familiar at any point in that individual story that's going on, where the other characters, they may show up, like you said, as the barkeep, as the serving woman in the tavern, as the noble you run into on the street,
as the prisoner in the dungeon.
Right. Or even this, like, think about the possibilities of this, right? So one of the things you could do is you could even have this when the players are still together, right? So if you have a player and they have thought of something interesting, players could actually get ready for this as the week comes forward. So they have ideas for their players, right? But what if they have a story or something they want to show the other players that logically their barbarian can't show them, right? So you could have the players arrive at an inn, right? The player characters arrive at an inn. All the players go in, but one of the horses has been injured, right? And he needs to be reshod, or one of the horses is skittish because they saw a warrior, and the barbarian says, "I'm literally going to sleep with the horse, with the horses tonight to calm that horse down," right? And then that player says, "But this bartender tells you this tale of two star-crossed elven lovers, and so this player had this idea this week." And he comes in with this story that's told to the player characters that may have nothing to do with the adventure they're on, but might be just a 5 or 10 minute story, or just some way that player wants to interact with the other player characters, where his player character is 100 feet away sleeping in the stable, but he had something, or he or she had something he genuinely wanted to share with the group. It really transforms the options and the things that players can do. And that's exciting.
With that, one, you did something really important there. You took the player's character they're playing out of the scene.
Right.
And so they can insert an NPC and play that NPC. But if like you said, if it's something they've thought about ahead of time, they should absolutely run it by the GM first and be like, "Do you mind if I do this?" Instead of just throwing it out there and stepping on their toes.
So if you're in a Nerdarchy game, you should definitely do that. Now, my take on this is I really consider myself I'm a technology guy, and I love what's happening in the world right now with reaction videos. So a huge thing in the YouTube culture right now is reaction videos. People are like, "Oh, so there's the Batman Superman YouTube video. I saw that." But what I want to see is I want to see my favorite reviewers' reaction to watching it, right? So I, as a game master, and I think there are other game masters out there, I like to be surprised. If you've got a game master who's like, "Yeah, bring it," I'm not. It goes with Dungeon World, which is, we are not playing to tell the story I wrote. We are playing to find out what happened. So you as a player out there, you should be doing both, right? If you're playing in Dave's game and he doesn't want some crazy surprise and you tell him some super weird story, run it by him. If you're in a Scott Garibay story, bring it. Like, whatever nonsense you want to throw in there, whatever craziness, I'm twice as crazy as you, so bring it in. So know what your game master wants. Does he want to be surprised, or does she want to be surprised, or does she want some time ahead of time? I agree with you that most game masters, they want some warning, because it can really range and get crazy. So I agree with you. If you have a surprise that you want to bring in,
know who you're playing with.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of
and that goes both ways, not just players, but players know your game master. Totally great.
I agree with Dave. If you're doing forward thinking, if you're planning something, tell the DM ahead of time. This way it might not take away. Like, if the DM is just like, "No, I'm gonna stamp that with a no," it's not gonna take away from everyone's time at the table.
And, you have to discuss.
Oh, and you know what? I'm sorry. Actually, to your point, what we're putting forward here is a brand new idea. So at least until you were competent at this, you definitely should be telling people, this is my idea and I want to bring it in, because, I'm always thinking, oh, well, we've been doing this for 6 months, but you're right, this is a brand new idea. So, and especially until everybody gets their stride and knows how to do this, you should be talking it through first.
And
But
also,
yeah,
too,
agreed.
it does. There's like an in between too, like depending on your game master. It's like, hey, I basically want to, do this little, what is it?
Like a little idea cameo,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Do you mind if I do it? And some DMs might be like, oh, that's fine, go ahead, and not ask for the details.
Right, that's true.
And
yeah.
Or it might be like, well, I'm not sure, what is it? So like there's also room in between of
that's valid. That's totally valid.
Giving the heads up and not giving the heads up. Like, so it might be like, oh, there's a surprise coming. Okay, I want to be surprised. Let it happen. Or
the other situation is like, if your party, if the table is not aware of what's going on, and let's say this barbarian, player character does this, and the player now takes over the bartender and starts telling this whole story. Now, is the reason for doing this because that player wrote a cool short story and he wanted to share it? Or, like, is the table going to, who's not used to this type of thing, and be like, oh, well, this is the quest for the night. We got to go research this, and now the whole campaign has been derailed because they're now looking into this thing that really the player just wrote a short story and he wanted to share it, and the two tragic lovers that are separated by the sea, they're gonna make, we must bring these two together.
Well, but I'm excited because I really think this can change what a D&D game is. And one of the things I think is interesting is every time you put a map down, every time you start putting mini down, a lot of players are like, this is the we're gonna fight. I'm gonna put my sword on. And so I think it's really interesting that you can have players at the table who are putting forward content, and now the players are like, is that the adventure? Is this the adventure? So you're right. It could be a little bit difficult to constrain, and I think everybody's going to have to see how this shakes out in their game.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I personally feel that I'm a big proponent of player agency. It's a rather new experience for me. Something I've picked up within the past year, and I try to incorporate it in every session. I want to give players the ability to add to the world. But at the same time, there is in my game, there is an overall story that I'm looking to get to an eventual completion. Now, if all of a sudden every single player is like, well, I don't care about that main story anymore, well then okay, well, we can move away from that. But at the same time, I do want to encourage people to say, all right, add to the game, add to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
well, that just comes down to then the DM's job to make sure that arc is still going on and there are consequences.
Oh, of course.
For not addressing the thing that's going on. Oh, those blood cultists. You brought the elven lovers together, but you forgot to deal with the blood cultists. So now, they're even bigger and more of a threat, and there's more problems going on.
But I think overall, what we're saying is, if you're out there, especially in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or if you're running Shadowrun, or if you're running Star Wars, the non-player character resources, in the old days, they were for the game master. We're saying, hey, here's an option to give them to your players and allow your players to enrich your game and make the experience for the players better and make the experience for the game masters better.
100%.
To allow players to say, I'm going to take my character, to not have to do that forced thing they've done in every game where it's saying, I'm going to make a decision my player character really wouldn't make, and say, if I can't play my player character for the next 10 minutes or an hour, I have options, and there's some cool things I can do in the game, and that's exciting and new.
I 100% agree. I think there's a lot of useful information there, a lot of new things that can be done. What do you guys out there think? Is this something you're going to allow in your game? Are you already doing this in your game? Put your thoughts, comments down below. While you're at it, like, share, even subscribe.
Hey, if you want to get cool nerdy swag, head over to nerdarchy.com and Nerdarchy the store.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.